When Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was constructing the Kaaba in Makkah, he did a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm going to recite the ayah to you. It's in Surah Baqarah, ayat number 129. He says, Rabbana wab'ath fihim rasulam minhum yatlu alayhim ayatika wa yuallimuhumul kitab wal hikmah wa yuzakkihim innaka antal azizul hakim. So as he's building the Kaaba, he's praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's saying, "Oh Lord, raise among them." So raise among them a messenger who will do what? Who will recite the signs. Yatlu alayhim ayati. And then he will teach them kitab and hikmah, the book and the wisdom. And then he will purify them. And then he says, you are indeed Azizul Hakim. You are the mighty, you are the wise. Now, we go to this dua and we recite the answer of this dua every time in Surah Jummah on the day of Jummah. Where we say what? What do we say? We say, يُسَبِّحُ لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ الْمَلِكِ الْقُدُّوسِ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَكِيمِ. Whatever is in this heaven and the earth, right? It is doing the subhan, it's doing the praise of Allah, it's saying the perfection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who is Malik, the king. He is the pure, the holy one. And he is Azizul Hakim, right? And then he says, هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة. So he says, he has sent amongst the unlettered ones a messenger, right? Who is doing what? يتلو عليهم آياته. He is reciting to them the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then as you are reciting the signs, then he is purifying your hearts. And then he is teaching them kitab wal hikmah. So kitab and hikmah is being taught together, right? Although they were before in clear error. So the four duties of the Prophet is basically to recite the signs to you, to show you the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you want to boil it down to what is the duty of our Rasul, he is reciting the signs, purifying the believers, teaching us the kitab and teaching us hikmah. Now, when our Rasul passed away, right, one of the problems became is that the teaching of the Rasulullah was essentially the sign of Allah was the Quran. And what happened is that when our Rasul passed away, there were people who said that the book of Allah is enough for us. So they did not focus any energy. In fact, they banned the writing of hadith. And they also did not write anything about the sunnah down, right? Now, so what happened is that caused a lot of disconnect between the sunnah of Rasulullah because the teacher's teachings, the hadith and the sunnah are disassociated from the book, right? You have this book, which is the sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but his hadith, the teacher's teachings and his sunnah or his practice is disassociated from the book. Now, what also happened is that at that time, they put in some other practices in place that would basically put in the idea of recitation of the Quran versus the understanding of the Quran. And you can see that practice even going on today, right? Where the focus is on the recitation of the Quran, especially during the month of Ramadan, right? Where they recite the Quran along with the prayers, but the understanding of the Quran part, and that tradition has been going on from right after Rasulullah passed away, right? Now, what that does is when you focus on recitation, that causes a disconnect between trying to understand the tafsir of the book, meaning the explanation of the book, and also the reason why the ayahs were revealed in the first place. So the asbab-e-nuzul, the reason why the ayah came, people have no idea about it. In fact, the hadiths were starting to being written down about 100 years after the Prophet passed away. So that caused a lot of confusion and misinterpretation of the book. Now, what happened is that let's talk about this book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, in the Quran, Allah says that He has sent this book in this, there is nothing missing from this book. That is Allah's statement in the Quran too, right? Now, I will recite to you some of the sermons from Imam Ali alayhi salam, salawat. From Nahjul Balagha, where he's making some statements about the Quran, right? And it will give us an idea about what the perception of Quran is and what the benefits of Quran is, the teaching of Rasulullah is. So he says, Allah revealed the book to explain everything. So this book explains everything. And nothing essential is missing from the book. So the book is explaining everything and nothing is missing from the book. And it contains clarification. Now you have to ask the question, when something is providing clarification, just reciting it without understanding it, is that going to provide you the clarification you're looking for? The answer is no. Then he goes around and he says in another sermon, he says, the Quran is commanding and prohibitive. So it commands you to do certain things and it prohibits you from doing certain things. And then it's silent, yet it's a very eloquent speaker. So the Quran on one hand is silent, but it's a very eloquent speaker on top of it. And Allah perfected its light through it and He completed His religion through it. So Allah completed the religion through the Quran. And then He says, therefore learn from it what is yet to come. Now we looked at Surah Al-Kahf, right? Last two lectures, when you recite Surah Al-Kahf, there's signs of Allah which is telling you about what's going to come in the future, for example. And then he says, narratives of the past. So there is lessons to be learned from the stories of the past. Remedies for your ailment. So if you have sickness inside your heart or your body, it's got remedies in it, right? And the arrangement of your affairs. So it's a complete book that has all these solutions in it, right? So in another sermon, he says, you need to make the Quran speak. Now we know it's a book, it doesn't speak by itself. So how do you make the book speak? You have to give some thought around how do you make the Quran speak. So one thing he says, no one sat with the Quran, but rose from it with an increase and a decrease. So when you sit with the Quran, Imam Ali is saying there is an increase and there is a decrease happening at the same time. The increase is in guidance, and then the decrease is in the blindness. So when you are trying to make the Quran speak, you have to not only recite it, but you have to start understanding it, because that's only the way you can increase your guidance and decrease your blindness. And then another place he says, learn the Quran, for it is the best discourse. Seek its healing for your ailments and seek assistance through it in your difficult times. So if you have difficult times, you have to seek assistance from the Quran, right? And he says in it, there is a cure for the most severest of diseases. And what are those diseases? He says it's the disease of disbelief, kufr, hypocrisy, nifaq, right? Deviation and misguidance. So all the ailments of the heart, there is a cure in the Quran for your ailments of the heart. Now, when I was growing up in countries like India and Pakistan, right, one of the things we used to do was they would send us to the madrasa, and then you would basically learn how to recite the Quran. And this is very prevalent in countries like India, Pakistan, and some of the other Asian countries where Arabic is not the primary language. So right from childhood, you're being taught how to recite the Quran. But that's where it stopped, right? You're only learning how to recite the Quran, because all you're trying to do is read the Quran without any understanding. So I could read the Quran, but I have no understanding of what it was saying. And in the same Surah Jummah, right, Allah says, Masalul lazina hummilut tawrata summa lam yahmiluha kamasalil himari yahmilu asfar. He says the example of those who were entrusted the Torah, right? And they did not take it on, so they did not believe it, right? It's like that of a donkey. Now, Allah is very explicit in His language when He uses the Quran, because Allah is not trying to be worrying about your feelings. He's telling it as the way it is, right? Because that's the way it is. Quran's language sometimes is very harsh, right? When it comes to giving out lessons, He says, the Jewish people who received the Torah, right? They are like donkeys carrying the book on their back, meaning they have the book, but they have no understanding of what the book is saying. Now, how many of you guys, you can, think about it yourself, when you have Quran sitting in your home as more like a decoration piece than actually something you open every day and read? And Allah's comparing that example, right? It applies to us too when you look at it, right? If you're not taking the Quran and understanding the Quran, then you're doing a very much disservice to yourself, because all the ailments and the solutions to your problem, the solutions to your faith, is all according to Imam Ali is in the Quran, but you have to sit with it and you have to understand it. If you don't understand it, then it doesn't really work. So I'm going to go back to the original ayah, right, where it says, يُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ, right? So now you have to ask the question, right? Allah is saying that He's teaching the kitab and the hikmah. The word hikmah actually is used in the Quran about 20 times, right? Now, according to the Quran, right, there were prophets who were given hikmah. Now, I'm not getting into the definition yet. I'm just telling you who received hikmah, right? So, Dawood alayhi salam received hikmah. Isa alayhi salam received hikmah. And our Holy Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he received hikmah, right? Now, according to the Quran, there are people who actually aren't prophets also, can receive hikmah. So in Surah Baqarah, ayat number 269, he says he grants hikmah to whomever he wishes. And whoever has been given hikmah, right, has been given an abundance of good, right? And none takes admonition except those endowed with insight, the ulil albab. They are the ones who are taking the lessons from it, the warnings from that. They are the ones, and they are the ones who have received hikmah, right? Also, you have, in Surah Luqman, right, where Allah says, Luqman was given hikmah. So you have non-prophets also, right, that are receiving hikmah. But Allah says, I give it to whosoever I want, right? However, when you look at Nabi Musa, right, there is no mention of Nabi Musa getting hikmah. Right? Now, although he received the kitab, he received the sharia, but he never received hikmah. Now, you also have another correlating word called hukum, right? Hukum or hakama. Hukum means the ability to judge between right and wrong, right? Now, even in the Quran, right, Yusuf alayhi salam says when he grew up, Allah gave him hikmah and ilm, hukum and ilm. He gave him the ability to judge between right and wrong, and he gave him knowledge, right? So the word hukum comes very close to hikmah, but it's not exactly hikmah in the first place, right? Bani Israel also has been said that they were given the kitab, they were given hukum, and they were given nabuwa. So Bani Israel, what happened is, we got all these rules that came in and they started following the rules, right? And they had the ability to judge between right and wrong. They were given a bunch of prophets, right? And, what they started doing is doing the practice without actually understanding what those practices were benefiting or what was the wisdom behind those practices. Right? Because, and why do I say that, right? And before I go that, I want to tell you, some of the other prophets who were given hukum. Hukum means the ability to judge between right and wrong. So I talked about Nabi Yusuf, Nabi Sulaiman, right? And even Nabi Musa himself was given hukum. But, then Allah says, in the Quran, He says, He has given the hikmah to Nabi Isa. He says Nabi Isa brought clear proofs and he said, I have brought you al-hikmah. And then I have come to make things clear for you that you differ about. So whatever they're differing about the kitab, he's come to confirm it. Nabi Isa did not have the kitab, but he had the hikmah of the kitab. So he came to actually clarify and teach them the wisdom of it. Now, a good example is that, when there was a lady who supposedly committed adultery and these people lined up to throw stones at her to kill her, Nabi Isa showed up and he drew a line on the ground and he says, let the first person who hasn't committed a sin throw the first stone. And what happened is everybody ran away. So there is the part about having the wisdom, but not having the practicing the rules without any wisdom, right? So that's a good example of how Nabi Isa was practicing hikmah versus just hukum, right? Now, our Prophet was also given kitab wal hikmah, right? In Surah Maida, ayat number 131, Allah says, Allah has sent down to you al kitab and al hikmah. And He has taught you what you did not know. Allah's bounty on you is great. So our Prophet after Jesus, right? Because there was no other Prophet after, Nabi Isa, Nabi Muhammad, Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he was given kitab and hikmah. So I'm going to go back and re-clarify, right? Nabi Musa was given kitab. Then Nabi Isa was sent to Bani Israel, and he brought hikmah to clarify to them what the kitab was. However, when it came down to us, Allah sent our Prophet with both kitab and He brought them hikmah too, right? So, one of the things that I wanted to kind of go back to the statement was when, Allah says in the Quran that, and even Imam Ali's statement is that everything that is in the book is already there, right? And the Quran is perfect in terms of everything that you need is already in there. So now you have to ask the question, right? That Nabi Musa, right? He was given the kitab. Now you guys may be very familiar with this, right? It's called the 10 Commandments, right? And anybody know the 10 Commandments? By the way, 10 Commandments, as we know today, are not exactly the same. There's plus and minus, one or two things that are off, but in general ballpark, it's about the same. The first one was, you shall have no gods before me. So you can't do shirk, right? And you shall not make yourself an idol or worship any false god. So you can't do ibadah of anybody except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You shall not take the name of your Lord in vain. So you cannot swear on Allah just because, right? Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Now anybody know what our Sabbath is? Actually the day of Jummah, right? That is really our Sabbath. For the Jews it's Saturday, for the Christians it's Sunday, for us it's Friday, right? And then it says, honor your father and mother. Then it says, do not murder, right? That's the number 6. Do not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. And then you shall not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. So that gives you a good example of what some of the things are as far as the kitab goes, right? Now, I want to go back to the question, right? You have to ask the question, where exactly is Allah talking about the 10 commandments in the Quran, right? Because it's important for us to know that if Allah says that the book is complete, then where exactly are the 10 commandments in the Quran? And by the way, when you look at the kitab, the rules part, it should be accompanied with hikmah, right? Because that's the only way it would be perfect, right? Because we have to go. And how many of you guys actually ever thought about that the 10 commandments are actually in the Quran or not, right? And then, but Allah makes the statement, I have given the kitab and I have given the hikmah. So the right place to look at is actually in the Quran. The Quran actually has the 10 commandments. It is Allah's version of 10 commandments, but they are exactly that, but they're accompanied by hikmah. If you go to Surah Isra, ayat number 22 through ayat number 39, it actually explains the kitab and hikmah. By the way, I never gave the explanation of what hikmah means. Hikmah means an abundance of wisdom. Right? Abundance of wisdom is what it means. So now you have to go look at these ayahs where Allah calls them hikmah in the Quran, and you have to see whether they are matching up with the kitab, and then are they teaching us some hikmah along with it. So in ayah number 222, Allah starts with saying, set up not with Allah any God, lest thou sit down reproved and forsaken. So don't do shirk, right? That's the first ayah, 22, right? And then he says, thy Lord has commanded that you worship none but Him. So you cannot worship anybody except Allah. So what were the first two? Don't do shirk, the 10 commandments. What was the other one? Don't do ibadah. So right off the bat, Allah is saying, don't do shirk, and then don't do ibadah. What was another one? He says, honor thy parents, right? So in that very same ayah number 23, right, he continues, he says, and that you show ihsan, kindness to your parents. And he says, if one or both of them attained old age with thee, say not even uff unto them. Now, you got it, like on one hand, in the Ten Commandments, it just says honor your parents. But here Allah is adding something else to the hukum, right? And he's saying, what is he saying? He's saying, don't say even uff to your parents, right? If they reach old age, but speak unto them a gracious word. Now, the importance of treating your parents good, especially when they reach old age, why is that emphasized a lot more, right? What happens is that our parents raise us, at some point of time we start thinking we know everything, we are earning the bread, we are making the money, we know all the things that are correct, right? And then we feel that we are entitled because now we are paying the bills and we have all grown up, that we can tell our parents whatever we want. Right? Somebody asked, Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, salawat. Says, what does ihsan mean? So he says, ihsan means that you have to do something for them, something good for them, even before they ask you for it. That's called ihsan. That's the level of ihsan Allah is expecting in the Quran, and especially is expecting to them when? In the old age. Right? And then, there is a hadith from our Prophet. He says, paradise lies under the mother's feet. You might have all heard about that one, right? There's another man who says, who should I, do ihsan with first? He says, your mother. And he says again, he says, your mother. And he says again, he says, your mother. And then at the fourth time, he says, then your father. Right? So, and then he continues in ayah number 24, and he says, lower unto them the wing of humility, out of compassion, mercy, and say, Rabbir hamhuma kama rabbayani saghira. We recite that in our du'as all the time, right? It says, oh Allah, have mercy on our parents, right? For they have raised me since I was a child, right? So you have to understand the importance of parents here, right? Because it teaches us the humility and the hikmah along with it. And then he continues, and he says what, in ayah number 25, he says, your Lord knows best what is in yourselves. If you do good, he is all forgiving to those who turn to him again and again. Now, a lot of times, we have this reverse psychology. Now, once parents know these ayahs, right, they start doing the reverse psychology on their child too, right? I carried you in my stomach for 9 months. Or now you've grown up, you know everything, right? Or now you are married, so you're not paying attention to my command, but you're listening to your wife, for example, right? So Allah is here giving the counterbalance to that, saying that, He knows what is in yourself. So do the best you can. The best you can be different for me, can be different for you, can be different for somebody else. Right? And Allah says, when you try to do your best, then Allah is all forgiving. Right? So this is the part about hikmah, right, that Allah is talking about in the Quran, right? So it emphasizes the part that we have to make sure that we take care of our parents, but then there has to be a balance, making sure that we take care of all the people who depend on us for us fulfilling their rights for them. Then he continues, he says, give the relative his right. Right? Give charity, right? As well as the poor and the traveler, but do not spend wastefully. Now, there's a lot of emphasis in Islam to do charity. This is the month we do charity, right? There's a great example in Surah Munafiqun, right? وَأَنْفِقُوا مِمَّا رَزَقْنَاكُم مِّن قَبْلِ أَن يَهْدِيَ أَحَدَكُمُ الْمَوْتُ فَيَقُولَ رَبِّي لَوْلَا أَخَّرْتَنِي إِلَىٰ أَجَلٍ قَرِيبٍ. So the day of judgment is there, and Allah is right there, and all these people are lined up, and they are seeing all these people who have done charity and good deeds, right? And they're seeing all the reward they are getting. So these people say, oh Allah, give me some more time, I'm going to go back and do charity, right? And Allah is saying, وَلَن يُؤَخِّرَ اللَّهُ نَفْسًا إِذَا جَاءَ أَجَلُهَا وَاللَّهُ خَبِيرٌ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ. Allah is saying nobody is going to be given extension after your time is up. So all the time you have in the world is right up front till the day you die. Right? So there's a lot of emphasis on charity, right? Our Rasul says, charity given to our relatives is like sadaqah, right? However, charity given to the poor, right, does two things. It wipes off sins and also wards off evil. So a lot of benefit, right? There's the ayah about, the grain. That one grain is like a corn. That's 7 corn, and in each corn there is 700 grains. So that's the level and then he says he multiplies to you on top of it whosoever you want, or whosoever he wants. So you have an idea about the charity, right? But then he continues, he says, indeed the wasteful ones are the brothers of the devil, and ever has shaitan been to his Lord ungrateful. So on one hand, he's saying do charity, but then on the other hand, he's saying don't be extravagant with your charity where you're giving away so much, right, that you don't have anything yourself, right? Don't be extravagant, right? Don't be wasteful, right? Allah says, Prophet says, the Allah hates excessive deeds. Anything you do in excess, Allah doesn't like. Even charity, Allah doesn't like in excess. Right? Imam Ali says, beware, restrain yourself from performing evil acts, because the rich become alienated by the lack of subsistence, extinguish their own wealth by indulging in useless luxury. So on one hand, you take useless luxuries, your risk goes away. So you have to be not wasteful, right? And then Allah continues, and then a lot of times happen, nowadays, in olden times, I remember my dad used to write a letter, and then the letter would go to the mailbox, and then the letter would reach 2 months later somewhere else, and then they would write an answer back, and 2 months later come back. Nowadays you have the phone and WhatsApp, you have people asking you for stuff right away. So what do we people do, right? Let's block it. Right? Because I don't want to, answer this person, because, if I'm going to be asked over and over again, I don't want to say no. So I don't want to say no. Let me just block him so I don't see the message at all. Now, in this ayah, Allah is saying that if you must turn away from them, the needy, when somebody is asking you something, right? Awaiting mercy from your Lord, which you expect. So you're expecting. You may not have it, right, at that time. Then speak to them a gentle word. Reply to them, be nice to them, say, hey, when Allah blesses me, brother, I will have, inshallah, I'll give it to you at that time, right? I don't have it right now with me. Just be nice about it, right? Because if you don't do that, Allah is saying you're actually violating the hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And then he says, as far as the wasteful ones, right, the people who give away too much, right? Now I have a lot of, people I know, even in this community, right, that I know, that do charity, right? And charity is good, right? But then, you see them struggle to make their monthly bills payment. Your mortgage is overdue, and your electricity bill is overdue, and here you are, spending money in charity, right? Allah doesn't like that either, right? Because He says, do not make your hand chained to your neck, right? Or extend it completely, right? And thereby become blamed and insolvent. So don't give so much that you don't have yourself, right? And on the other hand, don't be so miserly that your hand is chained to your neck that you're not giving anything at all. Right? This gives you a good example of how Allah is giving wisdom. This is wisdom along with the hukum, right? Or the hikmah, or with the kitab. And then he says, indeed your Lord extends provision to whom He wills, and restricts it to whomsoever He wills, right? There is a very famous ayah, Allahumma malikul mulki tu'til mulka man tasha wa tanzilul mulka mimman tasha. Allah is the owner of the mulk. He gives to whosoever He wants, and He takes away from whosoever He wants. Biyadihi al-khair. In both of them there is khair. When you don't have, that's also khair for you. And when you have, that's also khair for you. By the way, another place he says, that's also a test for you too. So when you have more, that's a test. And when you have less, that's also a test for you. But in that, there is khair for you. So it's the same thing here, right? Allah gives the provision, right? And you're supposed to do charity, but don't do it to the point where you yourself are binding yourself up, where you cannot fulfill your own obligations towards your own family and yourself. Right? Rasulullah says, the hand that gives is better than the hand that receives, right? So don't be to the point where you are giving so much that you don't have, then you are turning around and, your hand is the one who's going to be the one, trying to receive, right? And then he says, the virtue of giving without pride, right? or arrogance, right? As well as avoid begging. So when you give, don't give with pride, right? And then don't beg it, right? That's the balance that Allah's trying to teach you here, right? He says, do not kill your children for fear of poverty. We provide sustenance to them and to you too. Killing them is a great sin indeed. Abortion is a sin. This is a very hot topic going on in the United States of America right now. When you look at it, right, abortion is a big topic going on, right? So according to Islam also, abortion is not permissible. However, right, if the mother's life is endangered, right, because of the pregnancy, then it's you're allowed to do abortion, right? However, right, it is permissible as long as the soul has not entered the body. And according to our mujtahid, right, they say that 4 months is the limit. Abortion is not allowed under any circumstances after that. Now, there is a special circumstance, right? What if the child has been diagnosed with serious physical or mental disability, for example, right? So according to Ayatollah Sistani, he says, she's not allowed to abort unless taking care of such a child with disability will be extremely unbearable for the mother. Now, however, right, anytime you do an abortion, you have to pay blood money. And there is different levels of blood money you have to pay depending on when you do abortion. There is the 0 to 40 days, there's the 40 to 80 days, there is the 80 to 120 days, and then there is a very big penalty if you do it after 4 months. And by the way, it depends whether the flesh is developed, whether the bones are developed, whether it's a boy or a girl. There's different levels of penalties that you are supposed to pay. Now, however, right, Islam, or at least, we are allowed to do contraceptives, right, as long as it doesn't harm the woman's health. Now, by the way, the wife doesn't need the permission of the husband to do contraceptives, right? So that's kind of a little bit of, I went off topic just because Allah was talking about killing children, right? But on the other hand, Allah says, if you're worried about purely from a sustenance perspective, Allah is saying He's responsible for it. So if there is no other issues besides some of these couple of instances I talked about, Allah is saying, I'm the one providing provision, so don't kill the child. That's what Allah is saying in the Quran. And then He says, do not even go close to adultery. Remember what was one of the other 10 commandments, right? Do not commit adultery, right? So He says, don't even go close to it. Don't even put yourself in a situation where you might have to be in a position where something might happen. So he says, don't even go close to it, right? Because it is indeed a shameful act and an evil way. And then He talks about, not killing somebody unjustly, or not going near the property of an orphan except in a good manner, right? And then to keep your oaths. When you give a promise, right, keep your word. It's very important to keep your word. So keep your word, right? Because a lot of times what happens is, I've seen this, not that I'm trying to run one particular community or whatever in place, right? But, there's times there's some other people from some community, 9 times out of 10, they say something, they're not going to do it. And then there's, other type of people in communities who may not be Muslims, right? And 9 times out of 10, when they say something, they will do it. So we have to look at ourselves in the mirror whether we are practicing Allah's command in the Quran, right? And then He says, give full measure when you measure, weigh with an even balance, that is the best result. So when you do business, you're supposed to do it with honesty and integrity, right? Give the person whatever he is paid for. Don't give him less, because that's cheating. So having honesty and integrity in your business dealings is very important. And then He says, do not pursue that of which you have no knowledge. Indeed, the hearing, the sight, and the heart, all of those will be questioned. A lot of times, we start, somebody comes and starts gossiping about something, and we immediately say, hey, tell me more, what's going on? That's not a good thing. You have to immediately stop that person and say, hey, look, I don't, this is a moment, brother or sister, whatever you're saying, I don't believe it, it's a lie, and stop it right there, right? Because don't pursue what you don't have knowledge about. There's always 2 sides to a coin. right? And in all, we have, commands to actually cover up the defects of our fellow brethren. So don't even engage in the gossip part of the conversation, because you will be questioned, and you will not be questioned. Your hearing, your eyesight, your heart will be questioned that day, right? And then he says, do not walk on the earth with pride. Having arrogance. We looked at the story of the Ashab Kahf, like, the two gardeners, right? Where one of the gardeners had takabbur, right? And Allah says, you will never tear the earth apart, and neither will you reach the mountains in height. I have this fancy car, or I have this good home, or I have a bank balance, and that makes you proud. Allah doesn't like that, right? And then he says, and then he concludes by saying, that which is evil of all of these is detestable in the sight of your Lord. So Allah doesn't like this, right? He says these all are detestable things. And then he continues and says, what does he say? He says, Zalika mimma awha ilayka rabbuka minal hikmah. He says, what does he say? He says, this is the part of the wisdom your Lord revealed to you. And then he comes back again and he says, do not set up any God except Allah, lest you should be thrown into Jahannam. So if you do shirk, you're going to be thrown in Jahannam. However, all these things, Allah is giving you the hikmah to say what you can do and cannot do. I talked a little bit about Imam Ali alayhi salam, right? So, and it's his nights are coming. So, a little bit about him too, right? We know Imam Ali alayhi salam with a lot of, different of his accomplishments, wasabiqun, right? Like al-muqarrabun, the ones who are first and foremost are near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's Surah Waqia, right? If you look at the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam, everything he was sabiqun. He was always front and foremost every single time. There was not one time that he was not there supporting Rasulullah, supporting the message of Allah, right? Whether it was bravery in battles, or whether it was his wisdom and knowledge, right? He was always there, right? And there is a lot of things that we can talk about, right? But there's two particular instances I want to talk about, right? Where if Imam Ali had not done what he did, Islam would have been completely extinguished. And there's two places where I feel, at least looking at the history, I started looking at what accomplishments to list, and I read like 60 pages, and I was like, the author had kept writing more and more and more. So I decided there's only two places where you can actually see where, if he hadn't stepped in and did what he did, Islam would have been gone. The first was the night of Hijr, right? You had these kuffar, right? They were 15 people, right? They had, swords and spears ready to, strike at the, strike of dawn. And Rasulullah asked Imam Ali to sleep on the bed. Imam Ali asked him just one simple question. He said, Ya Rasulullah, are you going to be safe because I lay down in the bed? Because usually you'd have to fight for it. He says, yep. So Imam Ali says, yes, I'm going to sleep. And he slept peacefully on that night. And that night, if the kuffar had succeeded that night in assassinating our Prophet, Islam would have been gone. Yet he slept on that bed, fearless. Right? There was another case, right, when 10,000 mushriks, right, decided to attack Medina, right? And it was the Battle of Khandak, right, where they dug ditches, right? And then there was a warrior named Amr ibn Abdawud, right? He was known as strong as 1,000 warriors. And he jumped the Khandak, right? And he came and he stood right in front of Rasulullah's tent, and he started challenging the Muslims. Every time he challenged, Imam Ali got up, right? And Rasulullah said, no, sit down. Until finally Rasulullah said, okay, fine, go fight with him, right? And then the fight happened and Imam Ali subdued him. And as he was about to strike the blow, guess what happened, right? Amr ibn Abdawud spat on Imam Ali's face. And Imam Ali put his sword back in the sheath and he walked away. And then later on he came and finished the job, right? And somebody asked him, right, why did you do that, right? He said that, if I had killed him at that time, right, up to that point, everything I had done was for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when he spat on my face, I got angry. So if I had killed him at that moment of time, it would have been for me, not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the strike, that I cannot describe the circumstance, right? You have to imagine this, right? But you have the entire Arabia, 10,000 people who came to extinguish the light of Islam. This was probably one of the toughest times that Rasulullah ever faced, right? Besides his 13 years in Makkah, for example. And then at that time, Rasulullah, the one way to qualify this importance of this strike of Amr ibn Abdawud, Rasulullah says, the strike of Ali at Amr ibn Abdawud in the battle of Khandaq was worthier than the worship of all humans and jinns combined. Think of the importance of that one strike. Right from Adam till the day of judgment, we can keep worshipping all we want. The jinns can keep worshipping all they want. Yet, but his one strike is worth more than all the worship of all of these people combined. On the night of early morning of 19th of Ramadan, right? Ibn Muljim struck Imam Ali alayhi salam on his head, right? And I want you to kind of imagine this scene, right, where Ibn Muljim has been captured, right, and then Imam Ali does this wasiyah, right. He says, he says to his sons, right, he says, "O sons of Abdul Muttalib, certainly I do not wish to see you plunging harshly into the blood of Muslims, shouting, Amirul Mu'mineen has been killed. So don't go take revenge of my blood just because I was struck," right? However, right, he says, don't accept, just kill my killer. And then he says on top of it, this is the hikmah part coming into play, right? He says, wait till I die, and by his Ibn Muljim's existing stroke, then strike him with one stroke for his stroke. Just one strike for one strike. And by the way, do not dismember the limbs of his body. Now you have that example, and then you have the example of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, where may Allah bless your children, may you not get any sadness except Game Hussein in your life, right? She's standing in the court of Ibn Ziyad, right? Ibn Ziyad has the head of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and he's playing with his head. And then he's seeing all these prisoners in front of him, and he's looking at Bibi Zainab, I killed all your family, you are just prisoners in front of him, so I'm just going to deal a blow to her by making a statement. He says, Ibn Ziyad says, how did Allah's treatment, how do you like the treatment of Allah to your family? He's trying to down her spirits. And then, she answered, what you did is you did out of your own free will. But what I see is nothing but beauty. Ma araitu illa jamila. I see nothing but beauty in the martyrdom of my brother Hussein, right? My brother acted with dignity and kept reminding you about what you were doing wrong and kept inviting you to the right path. There is a very famous sermon of, Bibi Zainab alayhi salam in the court of, Yazid, where he is rejoicing on the revenge that his family, he took for the killing of his family, Utbah, Shayba, Walid, right? The tribe of the Khazraj clan, and he's gloating on it, right? And Bibi Zainab stands up. Look at the bravery, right? Look at the faith of heart, right? Now you can see the light shining of Imam Ali's light shining in her, right? And he says, "Oh Yazid, son of the freed, you think you have achieved a great triumph, and you have humiliated the progeny of Muhammad and extinguished the light of Allah from earth. But know that our affair is not confined to this world, and the consequences of this tragedy will reverberate throughout history." She then recites the ayah from the Quran, and she says, "Never think of those who have been killed in the cause of Allah as dead. Rather, they are alive with their Lord, receiving provision. Our martyrs are still alive, and their sacrifice has illuminated the path of truth." I want to ask this to Yazid. This is a question I have in my heart, right? That I want to turn around and ask Yazid. I want to ask him, "Oh Yazid, do you think you can erase the memory of Hussein and his companions from the believers of the heart?" And the answer will come, no, the story of Karbala will be narrated in every corner of the world. People will rise against oppression inspired by the sacrifice of Hussein. I ask the believers here, right, who weep for the tragedy of Karbala, let your tears, water the seeds of resistance. Remember the sacrifice of Imam Ali, remember the sacrifice of Imam Hussein, remember the sacrifice of Karbala, remember the sacrifice of the Aimma, right? Because in their martyrdom lies the victory of truth over falsehood. Our allegiance is to Allah and we submit to His will. And the saga of Karbala will live on forever, and the banner of truth will never be lowered in our hearts. May Allah give us the strength to stand up against injustice wherever it may be found. O Allah, we ask you for all that is good in this world and in the hereafter. O Allah, we seek refuge with you from all evil in this world and in the hereafter. O Allah, we ask you for the good that your servant and prophet has asked you for. We seek refuge with you from evil from which your servant and prophet sought refuge from. O Allah, we ask you for paradise and for that which brings one closer to it. And we seek refuge in you in hell and from that which brings one closer to it. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء والأموات تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك على كل شيء قدير. Please recite a Fatiha, but before that, a loud salawat.